The alarms wailed like dying whales in the dark. Red lights flashed across the endless glass corridors of the MSC Aurora, slicing through the midnight fog. Passengers screamed, running barefoot through the halls as the ship tilted hard to the left. Trays of untouched desserts and champagne bottles crashed to the floor. Somewhere deep below, the ocean roared, a sound older and angrier than any human cry. And in the middle of the chaos, 18-year-old Lyra Halden was on her knees, water up to her shins, her hands shaking over a cracked metal panel. "Come on," she whispered, her voice breaking. The floor groaned beneath her. She could feel it. If she failed, the ship would split open. Just minutes ago, she'd been invisible, a scholarship guest, working part-time on the ship to pay for her dream, marine engineering school. Nobody looked at her twice, the quiet girl from nowhere. But now, the captain had locked himself in the bridge, the chief engineer was unconscious, and the backup system had fried in the storm. 6,000 lives depended on her trembling hands. She ripped a wire out with her teeth, tasting copper and salt, her wet hair plastered to her cheeks. "You can do this, Lyra," she told herself, though her heart screamed otherwise. The floor groaned again, throwing her against the wall. Water burst through a vent, soaking her to the bone. Then, over the chaos, she heard a voice, a deep, terrified voice shouting her name. "Lyra!" She looked up through the flashing red light. It was Elias Moreau, the French trainee officer she'd secretly fallen for. His white uniform was stained with oil and seawater, his eyes wide with fear. "You can't be here. It's collapsing." But Lyra shook her head, clutching the wire. "If I leave, we all die," she said. The ship groaned again, metal screaming like it was alive. The lights flickered, then died completely. Only the red emergency strobes remained, pulsing in slow, heart-like beats. Elias crawled toward her, slipping on the flooded deck. "Lyra, listen to me," he begged. "You're just a trainee. You don't know what that panel controls." She looked up at him, her eyes glowing with a kind of desperate calm. "I know exactly what it controls. It's the ballast override. If I can reset it manually, I can stop the flooding." Elias froze. "That's impossible," he said. "You need 2 people, one at each valve." Lyra looked down at the cold, rushing water. "Then you better help me," she said. For a second, he hesitated, torn between orders and instinct. Then he nodded. The next moments were a blur of movement, sparks flying, metal bending, alarms screaming. The ocean was no longer outside. It was coming in, seeping through the cracks of the doomed ship. As they worked, shoulder to shoulder, Lyra's mind flashed back to the humiliation that had brought her here. The moment she'd promised herself she'd never be helpless again. But that was before the ship started dying. "Ready?" she gasped. Elias nodded, gripping the valve. "Now," she shouted. Together they pulled, one last desperate act against the ocean itself. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a violent hiss of pressure, a burst of air, and silence. The ship steadied, just barely. The alarms dimmed. The red lights flickered back to steady yellow. Lyra fell to her knees, shaking, gasping, alive. Elias stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You just saved us," he whispered. Lyra tried to smile, but then the intercom crackled to life. A voice spoke, low and cold. "This is the bridge. Someone has tampered with the ballast control. Security, detain whoever is in the lower maintenance deck." Elias's face went pale. Lyra looked up at the ceiling, her breath catching. "They think I sabotaged it." He took her hand, "And then we run," he whispered. Outside, the ocean screamed again. Rain hammered the ship like 1,000 fists. Lyra and Elias stumbled through the narrow metal corridors, drenched, hearts pounding in rhythm with the blaring alarms. The red emergency lights painted their faces in flashes of panic. Crew members were shouting orders in every direction. All personnel to lifeboat stations, someone yelled. But Lyra couldn't stop. If security caught her, she wouldn't just lose her scholarship. She'd be blamed for the ship's near collapse. "They won't believe me," she said, breathless. "They never do." Elias grabbed her hand, pulling her into a maintenance passage barely wide enough for two. "Then I'll make them believe," he said, eyes fierce. For a heartbeat, everything went still. The dripping pipes, the humming steel, the thrum of the storm above. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. He looked at her, his jaw trembling slightly. "Because you're the only one who didn't run." Hours earlier, the MSC Aurora had been a floating paradise, a week-long Mediterranean cruise glittering with laughter, champagne, and seashell necklaces. The sun was warm and gold, the ocean calm and endless. Lyra had been serving mocktails by the pool, her dark curls tied back, her name tag crooked. Nobody looked her in the eye except Elias, the young officer in training who always smiled like he saw her. But even his smile carried weight. He was the captain's godson, born into privilege. Lyra? She was an orphan from Bergen, Norway, a girl who'd grown up watching ships disappear into the horizon and promising she'd be on one someday. Her scholarship was her escape. But the other crew members whispered about her age, her accent, her late-night visits to the engine room. That morning, she'd overheard something she wasn't meant to. Two officers arguing in the control room corridor. "The ballast readings are off again," one said. "If we don't fix it, we'll capsize in the next storm. We'll fix it tomorrow. Passengers first, profit second." Lyra had frozen. The ship's balance systems, its heartbeat, were failing. But when she tried to report it, the chief engineer laughed. "You? The girl who cleans the deck panels? Go back to your mop." The humiliation burned in her chest. She had studied those systems for years. She knew something was wrong. Yet nobody believed her. That's when Elias found her crying in the lower deck corridor, hands trembling with anger. He didn't laugh. He just handed her a towel and said softly, "Then we fix it ourselves." They had started secretly meeting at night, deep in the engine bay where no one went. Elias showed her the logs, the fluctuations, the pressure spikes, the ignored warnings. Together they began tracing the system faults. And somewhere between the rumble of turbines and the glow of the control panels, something delicate began to grow. He'd bring her coffee in chipped mugs. She'd laugh at his awful French jokes. Their hands would brush when they passed the flashlight. It was the kind of slow, quiet connection that didn't need words. But beneath it all was a shared truth. They were both pretending to belong in worlds that had already decided they didn't. Lyra's world told her she was too young. His told him he was too kind. Now, running through the drenched corridors, as the ship trembled, all those nights came rushing back. The whispered plans, the stolen glances, the unspoken promise that they'd fix what no one else would. But now, they were fugitives. "Elias," Lyra said, voice breaking, "if they catch me, they'll lock me below deck." He shook his head. "Not while I'm here." They burst into the storage hold, the storm's rumble above like an angry god. Lyra leaned against the crate, catching her breath. "I just wanted to help," she whispered. He looked at her, rain streaking down his face like tears. "You did more than help," he said. "You saved us." But outside the door, heavy footsteps echoed closer. Security was coming. And Lyra realized something she hadn't before. Someone on that ship wanted the systems to fail. The footsteps grew louder. Lyra pressed her back against the cold steel wall, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. Elias crouched beside her, finger pressed to his lips. Through the narrow crack in the door, they saw two security officers sweep flashlights through the corridor. "Bridge orders," one said. "No one leaves the lower decks till we find the saboteur." The other grunted. "Who'd be stupid enough to mess with ballast controls?" Lyra's breath hitched. She met Elias's eyes. Both of them knew the answer. The ship groaned again, water sloshing somewhere deep below. Once the guards passed, Elias whispered, "We can't hide forever. We need proof you didn't cause this." Lyra nodded slowly. Then we go back to where it started, she said, the engine room. They slipped through the maintenance passageways, dark arteries pulsing with steam and shadows. The storm outside made the whole vessel tremble, metal singing under pressure. Every few minutes, the PA system crackled with updates. All guests remain calm. Technical issues are under control. But Lyra knew the voice was lying. The flooding had slowed, not stopped. She could feel it in the rhythm of the floor. When they reached the engine bay, the air was hot and heavy, thick with oil and electricity. Blue lights flickered over the massive turbines. And there, in the far corner, she saw it. The small access hatch she'd noticed days ago, sealed with a lock that didn't belong. That wasn't there before, she whispered. Elias frowned. What's inside? She swallowed hard. Something someone didn't want us to find. Elias found a crowbar and wedged it beneath the lock. With a sharp clang, it snapped open. The hatch creaked, revealing a cramped compartment lined with wires and blinking devices. Lyra leaned closer and froze. That's a signal jammer, she said softly. And that, she pointed to a second device, is a ballast override controller. Someone's been remotely tampering with the system. Elias's face strained of color. You mean this wasn't an accident? She shook her head, voice trembling. Someone wanted the ship to lose balance, to make it look like a system failure. For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the engines. Then Elias whispered, Lyra, this isn't just sabotage. This is murder. She backed away, her mind racing. Who would do this? Why? And why blame her? She thought of the engineer who laughed at her report, the captain who'd ignored her presence completely. We have to tell someone. Elias nodded grimly. The bridge. But if we go straight there, they'll arrest you before you can explain. He turned to the panel. If we can trace the signal, maybe we'll know who's controlling it. Lyra's hands flew over the circuits with a speed born from desperation. Her mind worked like a storm, rewiring, decoding, bypassing. Sparks flew. Then a small screen flickered to life. A name appeared in the transmission log. Chief Engineer Lorvik. Lyra's heart dropped. He's the one who called me a liar, she whispered. A sudden clang shattered the silence. Elias spun around. Too late. The heavy door behind them slammed shut, locking from the outside. Through the small porthole window, they saw a shadowed figure staring in. It was Lorvik. His expression was calm. Too calm. He mouthed something through the glass. You shouldn't have looked. Then he turned and walked away. Lyra lunged for the door, pounding her fists against it. No, no, she screamed. Elias grabbed her shoulders. Hey, look at me. She turned, her eyes wild. He's going to sink the ship, she whispered. Elias cupped her face in his hands, his voice low but steady. Then we stop him, together. The storm raged above them, and for the first time, Lyra felt it. The terrifying truth that saving the ship might cost her everything. The air inside the locked room grew hotter by the minute. Steam hissed from a broken pipe overhead, turning the air thick and metallic. Lyra puffed, pressing her sleeve to her mouth. We're running out of oxygen, she said, voice hoarse. Elias slammed his shoulder against the door, but it didn't budge. The engines groaned beneath their feet, vibrating like an angry beast chained too long. Somewhere far below, a deep rumble echoed, the kind that made the skin crawl. That wasn't thunder, Elias muttered. Lyra's heart skipped. He's flooding the ballast tanks, she realized. He's doing it manually now. Water began seeping through the floor grates, black and icy. Elias turned to her, face pale. We need to get out. Now. She nodded, eyes darting across the room until she saw it, an emergency shaft. Narrow, rusted, half submerged. Their only chance. Elias climbed first, forcing the corroded hatch open. Rain from the storm above trickled down the shaft, cold against their faces. Lyra followed, her fingers raw and bleeding from gripping the jagged ladder. The water rose fast, up to her knees, then her waist. "Faster!" Elias shouted from above. The ship tilted slightly, making the shaft sway. For a second, she slipped, her foot catching on a broken rung. Pain shot through her ankle. "Elias!" she gasped. He reached down, gripping her wrist just as a surge of water crashed up the shaft. For a heartbeat, everything blurred, the roar of water, the flash of lightning through the small vent above. Then his grip tightened. "I've got you!" he yelled. She could feel the tremor in his hand, not fear, but determination. Inch by inch, he pulled her up until they collapsed on the narrow walkway above, soaked, shaking, alive. The walkway was dimly lit, lined with rust and flickering lights. Beneath the grated floor, black water churned violently. Lyra lay on her back, gasping, staring at the ceiling. Her hair clung to her face like seaweed. "We're not going to make it," she whispered. Elias turned to her, brushing the wet strands from her forehead. "Don't say that. You already saved the ship once. You can do it again." She wanted to believe him, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lorvik's face behind the glass. Cold, empty, satisfied. "He'll blame me." "He already has." Elias looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Then we find proof, and when this is over, they'll see who you really are." His words were steady, but his eyes said something else, something unspoken, raw, and protective. A sudden tremor rippled through the metal beneath them. Lyra sat up. "That wasn't the storm," she whispered. "That was internal pressure. He's opening the lower vents." Elias checked the nearest control panel, his face tightening. "He's redirecting the ballast flow straight under the fuel compartment." Lyra's blood ran cold. "That'll ignite if it hits a spark." "Exactly," he said. "He's turning the whole ship into a bomb." They looked at each other, silent, terrified, unready, but unwilling to quit. Lyra stood, limping slightly, and grabbed the portable toolkit from the emergency cabinet. "Then we don't let him finish. We shut him down." Lightning flashed outside the small porthole, illuminating the sea, a vast black monster curling around them. They followed the narrow passage leading toward the control sector, water sloshing at their feet. Every few steps, the ship shuddered like it might tear apart. When they turned a corner, Lyra froze. A section of the corridor had collapsed, completely submerged under roaring seawater. Only the top of a metal railing peeked above the flood. "We can't cross that. It's suicide," Elias said. Lyra stared at the flood, her mind racing. Then she spotted a cable line hanging from the ceiling, thin but strong. "We can swing," she said. Elias blinked. "You're insane." She gave a trembling smile. "You said that the first time I fixed your navigation relay." He sighed, shaking his head. "And you were right then, too." He grabbed the cable, testing its strength. "You first." Lyra took a deep breath, the wind howling through the corridor. "If I fall—" "You won't," he interrupted, eyes fierce. "I'll catch you." And for the first time, she believed him. The wind screamed through the open corridor as Lyra swung across the flooded gap. The cable creaked beneath her weight, the sea roaring below like an endless throat. Her hands burned, slipping against the wet metal, but she made it, crashing against the far railing, gasping. "Your turn," she shouted over the storm. Elias jumped, landing hard beside her, just as a wave smashed through the broken window behind them. They both fell, water surging around their knees. "Come on," he yelled, dragging her toward a maintenance door. They burst through it into a dim, quiet room, an eerie silence after so much noise. Only the hum of machinery filled the air. Lyra froze. The walls were lined with screens showing every deck, every camera feed. "This is the surveillance hub," she whispered. Elias stared at the monitors. "He's been watching everything." On one of the screens, they saw the bridge, the captain standing with Chief Engineer Lorvik beside him. The captain's face was calm, even smiling as he spoke to the crew. "Passengers are safe," his voice echoed faintly from the monitor speakers. "The flooding was caused by a malfunction in the ballast control, traced to an unqualified trainee who accessed restricted systems without authorization." Lyra's stomach dropped. "He's talking about me," she whispered. Elias slammed his fist against the table. "He knows the truth. He's covering for Lorvik." The captain continued, voice cold and certain. "Security is searching the lower decks. Once the suspect is detained, we will restore order." The camera zoomed on the captain's face, and Lyra saw it then. Not calmness, not control, fear. The kind of fear that comes from someone being owned. Lyra turned to Elias, her voice trembling. "He's protecting Lorvik, but why?" Elias scanned the screens. One of them flickered to an encrypted feed, hidden behind normal access layers. Lyra leaned closer. The feed showed a cargo bay filled with crates marked "Restricted, Vesta Energy." Her breath caught. "That's illegal. Those are unstable lithium fuel cells. They're banned on passenger ships." Elias's eyes widened. "If those are near the ballast tanks?" Lyra finished his sentence. "Then Lorvik didn't just sabotage the ship. He's trying to destroy the evidence." Silence fell. Only the hum of the ship remained. Elias turned to her. "We need proof, a recording, something." Lyra nodded. "And we need it before he sinks us all." They searched the control hub, tearing through drawers and hard drives. Lyra's fingers flew over the console, downloading the hidden feed. Her pulse raced. Every beep of the machine felt like thunder. "Almost there," she whispered. Elias kept watch by the door, listening to the creaks and groans of the weakening hull. "Hurry," he said. "If they find us here, we're done." The screen flashed, "Transfer complete." Lyra yanked out the drive, shoving it into her pocket. Then static hissed. All the screens blinked out, one by one, until only the captain's face remained. His voice filled the room, cold and deliberate. "Miss Halden, if you can hear this, surrender now. You're endangering lives. This isn't your fight." Lyra stared at the monitor, jaw trembling. "Yes, it is," she whispered. "It always was." She grabbed Elias's hand. "We go to the bridge." They ran through the upper maintenance corridor, the storm outside like an orchestra of chaos. Every flash of lightning revealed new cracks in the walls, new pools of water spreading across the floors. "How do we even get to the bridge? Security's everywhere." Lyra's eyes blazed with determination. "We don't go through them. We go above them." She pointed upward, to the narrow ventilation shaft winding toward the bridge deck. Elias hesitated. "That leads through the captain's quarters." "Exactly," she replied. "If he's lying, that's where we'll find proof." He looked at her for a long moment, soaked, trembling, fierce, and nodded. Together they climbed. But as Lyra pulled herself into the shaft, her ankle brushed against a wire she hadn't seen. A small red light blinked. Elias's eyes widened. "Lyra! Trap!" A deafening explosion ripped through the corridor below. The blast hit like a hammer from the deep. The corridor below erupted in flame, a roar that seemed to shake the air itself. Lyra screamed as heat seared her legs, the shaft rattling violently. Elias lunged forward, grabbing her by the waist just as the lower vent blew apart. A fireball roared up the tunnel, licking at the metal around them. "Go!" he shouted, his voice lost in the chaos. Lyra clawed her way upward, smoke stinging her eyes, the taste of burning oil thick in her throat. Sparks rained over them like dying stars. The shaft trembled, bending under pressure. She could barely breathe. "Elias," she choked. "Hold on." His voice came from below, ragged but alive. "Keep climbing." The shaft door above them jammed halfway. Lyra slammed her shoulder against it, once, twice, until it burst open and she fell out into a narrow corridor, gasping, trembling. She turned back and saw Elias emerge through the smoke, coughing, his sleeve on fire. Without thinking, Lyra tore off her wet overshirt and smothered the flames. He looked up at her, face streaked with soot, and managed a crooked grin. "I'm fine." You look worse." She almost laughed, but then the ship tilted sharply to one side, sending them both crashing against the wall. The lights flickered, alarms screamed, and a new sound filled the air. A low, rolling thunder from deep inside the hull. Lyra froze. "That's not the storm," she said. "That's the fuel compartment igniting." Elias's expression hardened. "Then Lorvik's ahead of us. He's accelerating the collapse." Lyra pushed herself up, limping toward the stairwell. "Then we end this," she said. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes weren't. The stairwell was pitch black, lit only by the flickering glow of fire below. They climbed slowly, the sound of groaning steel echoing around them. Every few seconds, the deck beneath their feet shuddered, as if the ship itself was begging for mercy. "Lyra," Elias said quietly, breaking the silence, "when this is over, what will you do?" She hesitated, glancing at him through the smoke. "If we make it out?" He nodded. She smiled faintly. "I'll finish what I started, go to maritime school, build something that doesn't break." He grinned weakly. "You will." She looked back at him. "What about you?" He paused. "I just want to be someone my father would have been proud of." She frowned. "Your father?" He was the first officer on the Aurora's sister ship. He died saving passengers from a fire because the captain ignored his warnings. The same captain who's up there now. Lyra stopped cold. "Your godfather?" Elias nodded. "Captain Duval." The truth hit her like another explosion. So that's why Lorvik controls him. He's covering for the captain's past. If this ship sinks, it's not just sabotage, it's history repeating. Elias's eyes darkened, and he won't let anyone expose him. They reached the final hatch leading to the bridge deck, but the handle was glowing red hot. Locked. From the inside. Lyra's gaze darted to a side vent leading above the captain's quarters. "We can go through there." Elias hesitated. "That vent's too narrow. You'll get stuck." "Then you'll pull me through," she said, forcing a grin she didn't feel. The ship groaned again, a deafening metallic wail. Water sprayed through the cracks like angry breath. "We're running out of time. If that fire spreads to the fuel storage, this ship will explode." Elias looked at her one last time. "Then let's make sure it doesn't." Crawling through the vent was like moving through the lungs of a dying beast. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of melted plastic. Lyra's palms burned against the hot metal, her lungs screaming for air. Finally, she reached the grill overlooking the captain's quarters and froze. Captain Duval stood at his desk, speaking into a handheld radio. "Yes," he said, his voice trembling. "The ship will sink within an hour. Make sure the records disappear before the Coast Guard arrives." Lyra's blood turned to ice. This wasn't just sabotage. It was a cover-up, and everyone aboard was disposable. Elias appeared behind her, eyes widening as he saw the same thing. Lyra turned to him, whispering the words that would change everything. "He's not just afraid of Lorvik. He's working with him." The ship groaned again. Somewhere deep below, fire met water, and the MSC Aurora screamed. The moment Lyra pushed the vent grill open, the scent of salt and smoke filled her lungs. She dropped silently into the captain's quarters, landing in a crouch beside the polished mahogany desk. Papers fluttered everywhere, the wind from a shattered window ripping them apart. Captain Duval stood with his back to her, staring out into the storm like a man waiting for judgment. "You knew," Lyra said, softly, her voice trembling with fury. He turned slowly, his uniform immaculate despite the chaos. "Miss Halden," he said, almost kindly, "you shouldn't be here." Elias climbed down behind her, gunmetal eyes burning. "You lied to everyone," he said. "You blamed her to hide Lorvik's sabotage." The captain's expression flickered. Not guilt, but exhaustion. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "You think this ship belongs to me? It belongs to them." He pointed upward, toward the ceiling, toward the invisible company that owned everything. Lyra stepped forward, rain blowing in through the shattered glass, drenching her hair and uniform. 6,000 people, she said, her voice breaking. Families, children, And you're just going to let them die to protect your career? Duval's jaw clenched. You think I want this? He snapped. They told me to keep quiet. The cargo is military, classified. If anyone finds out, I lose everything. Elias stepped between them. So you'd rather lose 6,000 lives instead? The captain's eyes softened for a fleeting second as he looked at Elias. I lost your father because I spoke up once, he said quietly. He died saving a ship no one cared about. I swore I'd never defy orders again. Silence fell, broken only by thunder. Elias's face twisted in disbelief. You let fear turn you into him. A coward. Duval's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the desk drawer. You don't know what you're saying, he muttered. Lyra moved instinctively. Don't, she said. But too late. He pulled out a flare gun and aimed it at the control door. You can't stop this, he said. If Lorvik fails to sink us, he'll finish the job himself. The explosion's already primed. The flare's glow reflected in his eyes, desperate and broken. Alliance held his hands up slowly. Captain, listen, we can still stop it. We found the proof. Everything. We can clear your name. Duval hesitated. The gun wavered. Then a voice crackled through the radio on his desk. Lorvik's voice. It's too late, Captain. The girl and the boy are with you, aren't they? Good. Let them burn with you. The radio went dead. Duval's face turned pale. For the first time, Lyra saw the truth. He wasn't the villain. He was a man trapped in his own guilt. Help us, Lyra said softly, stepping closer. You can still make this right. Tell us where the manual fuel override is. We can stop the chain reaction. Duval stared at her, rain streaking down his face like tears. You don't understand, he said weakly. It's sealed. Only Lorvik can access it. Lyra shook her head. No, every system has a back channel. You hid it for emergencies, didn't you? For a moment, Duval said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded. Under the observation deck, there's an emergency access tunnel, but once you go down there, there's no way back. Lyra swallowed. Then that's where I'll go. Duval looked at her in disbelief. You died down there. She gave a broken smile. Then at least it'll mean something. A massive crash tore through the ship, throwing them all off balance. The bridge window shattered completely, waves exploding inward. Duval stumbled toward the control console. Go, he shouted. I'll hold the system long enough for you to reach the tunnel. Elias grabbed Lyra's arm. We can't leave him. We have to, she said with tears in her eyes. They ran for the exit as Duval's voice boomed through the intercom. This is your captain. Abandoned ship. Repeat, abandoned ship. His final words echoed behind them as they vanished into the storm. Forgive me, Lucien. Elias froze mid-run. My father, he whispered. The deck cracked beneath them, fire bursting from the lower hull. Lyra pulled him forward. We'll grieve later. Right now, we save them. Together, they disappeared into the smoke, running toward the heart of the ship and the fire beneath the waves. The passage beneath the observation deck was barely wide enough for one person. The air was thick, hot, and tasted of metal and smoke. Every clang of a ship's dying heart echoed through the walls. Lyra crawled first, a flashlight clenched between her teeth. Behind her, Elias followed, coughing through the haze. How far down? He called. Almost there, she said, her voice trembling. The light flickered over pipes, dripping salt water and steam. Somewhere far below, fire crackled, muffled but alive. It's flooding, Elias muttered. We're under the waterline now. Lyra pressed on. Then we moved faster. But deep down she felt it, the pressure, the weight of the sea pressing against the hull. It wasn't just danger, it was time itself closing in. When they finally emerged into the access chamber, the air felt colder, heavier. A massive steel cylinder stood in the center, surrounded by control panels and gauges, the manual fuel override. The chamber lights flickered, casting their shadows across the metal walls. Lyra approached the control board, running her hands over the switches. "It's worse than I thought," she whispered. "The pressure's building past safety limits. If the chain reaction hits the lithium cells—" She stopped, her voice breaking. "The ship will go up like a bomb." Elias stepped closer. "Then what do we do?" Lyra swallowed hard. "We release the fuel pressure manually, vent it into the ocean." But she hesitated. "Someone has to stay here to keep the valves open." His eyes widened. No, we find another way." She looked at him, tears welling through her eyes. "There isn't one." Elias grabbed her shoulders, his voice rough with desperation. "Lyra, you can't. You'll drown." She shook her head. "If I don't, everyone else will." "Then I'll stay with you," he said firmly. "You're not dying here alone." Her chest tightened. For a moment, all the noise, the alarms, the storm, the groaning metal, seemed to fade. There was only him, eyes dark and defiant, face streaked with soot and salt. "Elias," she whispered, "you have to live. You have to tell them the truth." "No," he said, voice cracking. "I have to tell you something else." She froze. "What?" He hesitated, breathing hard. But before he could finish, the deck lurched violently, throwing them both to the ground. A geyser of seawater burst through the wall, spraying ice-cold fury. "We don't have time," Lyra shouted, scrambling to the controls. Water poured into the chamber in sheets, hissing as it met the burning pipes. The air filled with steam, turning everything into a glowing blur. Lyra's fingers flew across the levers, locking two, forcing another open with a grunt. Metal screamed under her touch. "Lyra!" Elias shouted. She ignored him, twisting the final valve with both hands. The indicator light turned green. "It's working!" she gasped. The pressure gauge began to drop. But the flood kept rising, ankle deep, knee deep, waist deep. "Go!" she shouted. "Get out!" Elias shook his head, clutching the railing. "I'm not leaving you." She turned, her voice breaking through the roar. "Please, Elias, if you ever cared about me, go." The words cut like glass. He hesitated, then stepped back, tears cutting past through the soot on his face. "I'll come back for you," he said. "I swear it." She smiled faintly. "You'd better." He disappeared into the passage, his flashlight vanishing into the dark. The water was at her chest now, freezing, relentless. Her arms ached as she held the last valve steady. Every second felt like an hour. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her lips blue. "Hold it," she whispered to herself. "Just hold it." Through the rising water, she saw the gauges drop to safe levels. The pressure was stabilizing. The ship was saving itself, but at a cost. Her legs went numb. Her vision dimmed. The sound of the storm faded to a distant hum. Then, hands. Rough, warm hands. Elias. He had come back, half swimming, half crawling through the flood. "I told you," he said, voice breaking. "I'm not leaving you." He grabbed the lever with her, helping her hold it as the room filled completely. In that final moment, before the water took them both, he whispered, "Now you know what I was going to say. I love you." Then the sea swallowed the light. The world was quiet, too quiet. Lyra floated in a gray void, weightless, timeless, lost between light and dark. The roar of the flood had stopped. The ship's tremors had faded. All she could hear was her heartbeat, soft and slow, echoing through water and memory. Images flashed in her mind like broken glass. Elias's hand gripping hers, his lips moving beneath the rising water, the flash of emergency lights fading into black. She wanted to open her eyes, but her body refused. Then, faintly, She felt something, pressure on her chest, a distant voice calling her name. Lyra? Come on, Lyra! A rush of air filled her lungs, and she coughed violently, salt water spilling from her mouth. She gasped, sucking in air that burned her throat. The world returned all at once. Sirens, shouting, the distant thud of helicopter blades. She was lying on the deck, drenched and trembling under a sky torn open by lightning. Crew members in orange life vests swarmed around her, hauling people into lifeboats, screaming orders over the wind. Lyra blinked through the blur, her voice raw. "Elias," she whispered. No one heard. She pushed herself up, ignoring the pain that tore through her ribs. "Elias," she cried again, scanning the chaos. Bodies. Dozens of them. Some alive, some not. "Miss, you need to get in the boat," a crewman shouted, grabbing her arm. She ripped free. "No, there's someone down there." "The lower decks are sealed," he yelled back. "It's over." She shook her head, tears mixing with seawater. "Not for me." She stumbled toward the stairwell, but a hand stopped her, a small, trembling hand. It was the little boy from the arcade, Mateo, eyes wide and terrified. "You said you'd find my mom," he whimpered. Lyra froze. She remembered that promise. The ocean howled around them. "I will," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I promise." Lightning split the sky, revealing the horror below. The MSC Aurora, once magnificent, was broken in half, one end sinking into the Black Sea. Lifeboats swung wildly as passengers screamed. Lyra dragged Mateo toward the nearest one. "Hold on to me," she said, lifting him over the railing. "Don't let go." "What about you?" he cried. She smiled weakly. "I'll be right behind you." A wave slammed into the deck, throwing them apart. Mateo tumbled into the lifeboat, shouting her name. Lyra slammed into the railing, pain exploding through her shoulder. The deck tilted violently as the stern began to sink. The captain's voice echoed faintly through the intercom, garbled, distant, fading. "This is Captain Duval. Evacuation. Godspeed." She looked up and saw the bridge collapsing into the sea. And then, there he was, Elias, clinging to the twisted metal of a broken mast, his face pale, his eyes searching for her. "Elias!" he shouted. She ran toward him, the ship splitting beneath her feet. Steam hissed from ruptured vents. Fire burned on water. Every step was a battle. Elias reached out his hand, his arm bleeding, his voice raw. "Come on!" he screamed. She jumped, barely catching his wrist. Their fingers locked together. "You came back," she gasped. "Told you I would." The ship groaned beneath them, its final breath before breaking completely. "We have to jump," he shouted. She hesitated, looking down at the raging sea below. "Together?" "Always." They leapt. For one weightless moment, there was silence, just their hands clasped, falling through lightning and spray. Then the ocean hit them like stone, cold, violent, endless. They sank deep, the light fading above, their grip slipping, until something pulled them upward. A lifeboat spotlight slicing through the darkness. A rope dropped. Elias grabbed it, holding her close. "Don't let go," he whispered. "Never," she replied, as rescuers hauled them into the light. When they broke the surface, the world was chaos, sirens, screams, and fire reflecting off the waves. Lyra coughed, her lungs burning, her fingers still locked in Elias's. Paramedics pulled them aboard the rescue vessel. She turned her head, her lips trembling. "We did it," she whispered. He smiled weakly. "You did it." She shook her head. "We did." Then her gaze drifted toward the sinking ship, the great Aurora, once glowing with music and laughter, now slipping beneath the waves like a dying star. Tears filled her eyes.
All those people. You saved most of them, he said quietly. You gave them time. The captain's voice echoed faintly through her memory. Forgive me, Lucian. She turned to Elias, whispering, Your father would have been proud. He nodded, squeezing her hand. So would yours. They watched in silence as the ship disappeared into the depth, and for a long, aching moment, the ocean was still.
The next morning, the world woke to her name, Lyra Halden. Her face was everywhere, on screens, newspapers, radios, and whispered in coffee shops across oceans. The 18-year-old who saved 6,000 lives. Drone footage showed the shattered wreck of the MSC Aurora, floating like a ghost on the horizon, black smoke curling into the dawn. Lyra sat on a cot inside a rescue tent, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Every flash of a camera made her flinch. The reporters outside shouted her name like vultures. How did you do it? Did you lose anyone? What was it like inside? She said nothing. Her hands trembled as she clutched a silver bracelet, Elias's, marked with the letters LH. He was still unconscious in the med bay, breathing through a mask. She glanced toward him, her heart aching. He looked so still, too still. The doctor said he'd inhaled too much seawater. Lyra swallowed hard, whispering, You promised you'd stay. By noon, government officials had arrived, stern faces, cold smiles. They called her Miss Halden, like she was a witness in a trial. You understand this incident is under federal review, one said. We need a full account of your actions. She nodded slowly, but inside, fear crawled up her spine. The captain's final words haunted her. The cargo was military, classified. If she told him about the illegal weapons Lorvik smuggled aboard, she'd expose something far larger than the shipwreck. But if she stayed silent, justice would drown with it. I just did what I could, she said softly. The ship was failing. I followed the emergency system. The official's eyes narrowed. So you're saying there was no sabotage? Her gaze drifted to the tent flap where sunlight flickered on the sea. I'm saying I'm not sure, she whispered. But she was sure. Lorvik had tried to destroy them, and someone powerful wanted it erased. Later that evening, the survivors gathered around bonfires on the beach, wrapped in blankets, holding each other like ghosts who'd come back wrong. The air smelled of salt and smoke. Lyra sat apart, watching the waves crash against the wreckage drifting offshore. Children slept in their parents' arms. Someone began to sing softly, a hymn for the lost. She looked down at the sand, her hands trembling. They'll never know what really happened, she murmured. They don't need to, a voice said behind her. She turned. Elias stood there, pale but alive, a bandage around his head. She gasped, standing so fast the blanket fell from her shoulders. You're hard to kill, he said with a weak smile. She threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. I thought you lost me. You almost did, he whispered, his hand on her hair. But you don't get rid of me that easy. They sat together under the stars, silence speaking louder than words. They think you are a hero, Elias said softly. I'm not. I just didn't want anyone else to die. That's exactly why you are one. She looked at him, eyes glistening. Do you ever wish we'd never gone? He smiled sadly. If we hadn't, I wouldn't have met you. The ocean murmured in the distance, reflecting moonlight like broken glass. She traced the edge of his bracelet, whispering, What happens now? He exhaled. Now the world wants answers, and someone's going to make sure they never find them. Lorvik? She asked. He nodded. He's still out there. Her stomach dropped. I thought he went down with the ship. He didn't, Elias said quietly. I saw him climb into a maintenance sub before the explosion. He escaped. The fire crackled between them. Then it's not over, Lyra whispered. 2 days later, the headlines changed. Missing crew member identified. Lorvik vanished with black box data. Rumors exploded online. Conspiracy videos called it an inside job. Lyra watched the footage of herself shaking hands with the rescue captain, her smile hollow.
The world saw a hero, but she saw a liar, someone who'd let the truth sink to keep everyone else afloat. That night, she stood on the shipyard balcony, the wind tangling her hair. Elias joined her quietly. "You can't fight them alone." "Then I'll fight smarter." "The ship may have sunk, but Lorvik is alive. That means proof survived too." "And if going after it gets you killed?" She met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "Then at least I'll go down fighting for the truth." He smiled faintly, taking her hand. "Guess I'm coming with you." The camera flashes faded below. Above them, the stars burned cold, and the next storm was already gathering.
The government called it an accident. The media called it a miracle. But Lyra knew better. 2 weeks after the wreck, she stood outside a private hospital in Lisbon, watching the waves crash against the cliffs below. The world had moved on. The news cycle had shifted to politics and celebrities. Only a few still whispered about the girl who saved the ship. She slipped on her hood, glancing back toward Elias, leaning against a rental car, his arm still in a sling. "You're sure he's here?" she asked. "Positive," he said, tapping a folded document against his palm. Lorvik's name appears on the hospital intake records. Burn injuries, false ID. Lyra exhaled, nerves buzzing. If he's alive, he knows everything. Elias nodded grimly. "Then we get him before they do." She looked up at the looming hospital tower. "And if we're too late?" His answer was quiet but steady. "Then we make them wish we weren't." They entered disguised as journalists, badges forged, cameras slung around their necks. The sterile corridors hummed with fluorescent light. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. Every step echoed like a heartbeat. Lyra's eyes flicked to the security cameras. Too many. "He's on the restricted floor," Elias murmured. "Room 618. They took the service elevator. As the doors closed, Lyra caught her reflection in the metal, pale, tired, but resolute. The doors opened onto a quiet hallway. At the end, 2 men in black suits stood outside the target room. "Not press," she whispered. "Government." Elias frowned. "Which means Lorvik's not a patient, he's a prisoner." A plan sparks behind Lyra's eyes. "Then we make them think we're delivering a message." She pulled out a clipboard and strode confidently forward. "Transfer orders," she said crisply. The guards frowned. "Authorization?" "You'll find it's above your clearance," she said, voice sharp enough to slice tension. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, one guard opened the door. Inside, the room smelled of iodine and fear. Lorvik sat on the bed, one arm in a cast, his face scarred but alive. His eyes flicked up, recognition flashing instantly. "You," he said coldly, "the girl who ruined everything. You almost killed 6,000 people. You call that ruining?" He smirked. "You think you saved them? You just delayed the inevitable." "What does that mean?" Elias demanded. Lorvik leaned back, his voice calm, calculated. "That ship wasn't the first, and it won't be the last. Do you really think governments build vessels that big just for leisure? The Aurora was a test, an experiment in transport logistics for defense contracts. You saved a prototype. They'll build another, stronger, deadlier." Lyra's stomach twisted. "And you were going to sink it to prove what? That they can't hide corruption behind glass walls? That sometimes the sea needs to take back what men stole?" Elias stepped forward, fury in his voice. "You murdered innocent people to make a statement." Lorvik's smile didn't waver. "Heroes and villains are just words history rewrites." Lyra clenched her fists. "Where's the data, the black box?" "Safe," he said simply. "Hidden in the wreckage. And you'll never reach it. They sealed the site under military control." Lyra's pulse pounded. "Then we'll find a way in." Lorvik tilted his head. "You think the world wants the truth? The truth kills economies. It ends careers.
You'll be silenced before you even touch the water." She stepped closer, her voice shaking but steady. "You underestimate what a girl who's already drowned will do." His eyes flickered, something like fear, but before he could speak again, an alarm blared through the hall. "Unauthorized access detected," a voice boomed. Elias grabs Lyra's hand. "Time's up." Lorvik smirked. "Run all you like, girl. The sea's already chosen you." They sprinted down the corridor as guards swarmed the floor. Elias fired the emergency extinguisher at the sprinklers, filling the hall with mist. "Left!" Lyra shouted. They crashed through a maintenance door, bursting into the parking lot as rain poured down in torrents. Alarms echoed behind them. Elias started the car, tires screeching. "He's lying," Lyra said, breathless. "There has to be a way back to that wreck." "If he's telling the truth, the military's guarding it. Then we steal their map." He shot her a glance. "And how do you plan to do that?" She looked ahead, eyes burning with determination. "The same way I saved that ship? By doing what no one else dares." Lightning ripped across the sky as the car vanished into the night, chased by sirens. And for the first time since the wreck, Lyra smiled not with fear, but with fire. The storm wasn't behind her anymore. It was just beginning.
The storm had calmed, but the sea hadn't forgotten. 3 weeks after the wreck, the military declared the Aurora's wreckage unsalvageable. Officially, the site was closed, off-limits, dangerous, sealed by international order. But Lyra stood on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, wind whipping her hair, staring at the faint outline of cranes and ships in the distance. "They're still pulling something out," Elias said beside her, binoculars in hand. "It's not recovery work, it's containment." Lyra's heart tightened. "The black box," she whispered. Lorvik wasn't lying. Elias nodded grimly. "If we want proof, it's down there." She turned to him, determination flaring in her chest. "Then that's where we're going." His brow furrowed. "You mean diving? Lyra, that wreck's 200 feet down." "I've already been deeper than most people ever survive," she said softly. He looked at her, half in awe, half in fear. "You realize this could kill us?" She smiled faintly. So could silence. The next night, under a moon half buried in cloud, they stole a small research vessel from a private dock on Cascais. The engine hummed low as they drifted toward the restricted zone. Floodlights glowed in the distance where military divers worked like shadows in the mist. "They'll have sonar patrols," Elias muttered, checking the oxygen tanks. "We get caught, we disappear." Lyra tightened her wetsuit, eyes on the horizon. "Then we don't get caught." She pulled down her mask and slipped into the water without hesitation. The ocean wrapped around her like memory, cold, infinite, alive. Elias followed, his flashlight slicing through the blackness. The wreck appeared below them slowly, like a ghost rising from the deep. Its steel spine broken, decks twisted, windows staring upward like the eyes of the dead. Lyra's heart clenched as she saw the faint outline of the ballroom where she'd once danced. "She's still beautiful," she whispered through the calm. Elias replied softly, "So are you." They swam deeper, past torn holes and silent corridors filled with drifting silt. Fish darted through the broken windows. Everything was still except the echo of their own breath. Then, movement. A light flickered near the ship's bow. Lyra froze. "Someone's down here." Elias's voice came low and tight. "Military divers, 2 of them." They hid behind a collapsed staircase, the beam of flashlights sweeping past. Lyra held her breath, pulse pounding in her ears. Once the divers moved on, she motioned forward. "We're close." They reached the navigation deck, now lying at a tilted angle. There, half buried in sand and metal, was a black sphere the size of a helmet, the ship's flight recorder. Lyra reached for it, fingers trembling. "This is it," she whispered. The truth. But as she pulled it free, a sharp metallic click echoed. Elias's eyes widened. Lyra! Mine! The explosion rocked the wreck. The shock wave threw them both backward, slamming into twisted beams. Bubbles and debris filled the water like shattered glass. Alarms blared in her headset. Elias! She screamed, searching through the haze. He floated limp for a moment before his hand twitched. I'm fine. Just go. Not without you. She grabbed his vest, dragging him toward a breached doorway. The water was filling with smoke and silt, visibility near zero. It's rigged, Elias coughed. They planted charges to destroy the evidence. Lyra clutched the black box to her chest. Then we take it now or die with it. She kicked hard, swimming upward as a second explosion thundered below, tearing the wreck apart. The current grabbed them, pulling them into a spiral of fire and metal. Elias reached for her, their hands brushing in the chaos. Lyra, hold on! I'm not letting go, she screamed, her lungs burning as they rose toward the surface. They burst through the waves under a sky of flame with lightning. The research vessel was already half sunk, the military ship turning toward them. They saw us, Elias shouted, ripping off his mask. Lyra clutched the black box, coughing seawater. Get to the beacon, she yelled, pointing to a floating emergency buoy they dropped earlier. Bullets splashed into the water behind them. Elias dove first, blood mixing with salt. Lyra followed, every stroke fueled by fury. The moment she reached the buoy, she slammed her fist on the distress signal. A green flare shot into the sky. The military vessel froze, its spotlight cutting across her face. For one suspended heartbeat, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then, sirens. Multiple. International patrol boats emerging from the fog. Elias laughed breathlessly. You called the world, he said. Lyra smiled, exhaustion washing over her. No, she whispered. The world called me. The hearing was held in Geneva, inside a hall made of glass and silence. The world's eyes were on her again. Flags lined the room. Cameras glinted like watchful stars. Lyra sat at a long table, the black box resting before her, sealed and scratched, but still humming faintly with power. Across from her sat the International Maritime Commission, uniformed men and women with polished voices and sharper agendas. Elias sat behind her, still recovering, his gaze steady on her back. When the chairman spoke, his voice echoed like a verdict. Miss Halden, are you aware of the gravity of your claim? You allege that the MSC Aurora was sabotaged, not by rogue actors, but under government direction. Lyra's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. I'm not alleging, she said softly. I'm proving. A murmur rippled through the hall. She pressed the play button. Static filled the speakers. Then a voice. Lorvik's voice. This is experiment 47. Pressure sequence initiated. Begin containment. The room froze. Reporters gasped. The officials exchanged glances like falling dominoes. The chairman's face turned pale. Where did you obtain this recording? From the wreck, Lyra said, voice trembling but fierce. It was in the navigation chamber. The military tried to destroy it. I was there when they detonated the charges. That's impossible, one officer snapped. The site is restricted. Exactly, she said. Restricted for truth. The crowd erupted in whispers. The chairman pounded the gavel. Order! But it was too late. The floodgates had opened. Elias stepped forward from the audience. She's not lying, he said, voice rough but steady. I was there. I saw what they tried to hide. Camera swung toward him. The moment stretched. 2 broken survivors standing before the world. The chairman's tone softened. Miss Halden, what do you want from this tribunal? She took a breath.
Not revenge, not fame, just accountability. For every life lost, for every secret buried under the sea. That night after the hearing, Lyra stood alone on the balcony of her hotel. The city below glittered with neon, alive and indifferent. She could still hear the echoes of the hearing, the chaos of reporters, the weight of the truth she'd unleashed. The black box was now under protection, but she knew better than to trust that word. "They'll come for it," Elias said quietly, stepping beside her. She didn't turn, but she smiled faintly. "Let them. It's already out there now. The world heard it." He nodded slowly. "You think that's enough?" She looked out toward the dark horizon. "It's a start." The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faint scent of salt. "I used to be afraid of the ocean. Now I think she's been trying to speak all along. I just wasn't listening." Elias studied her face, something tender flickering in his eyes. "And what is she saying now?" Lyra's lips curved into a sad smile. "That the sea never forgets." The following morning, chaos returned. News outlets around the world aired the recordings. Hashtags flooded every screen. Hashtag Aurora Truth. Hashtag Lyra Halden. Hashtag The Sea Remembers. Protests erupted in coastal cities demanding justice. The governments involved denied everything. Fake, they called it, manipulated data. But Lyra had learned something about lies. They were fragile when spoken against by someone who had already survived death. The commission reopened the investigation under international pressure. For once, silence was not an option. Yet, in the shadows, danger moved. A note slipped under her door that night. "You were warned. Stop digging." She showed it to Elias, who frowned. "They're scared," he said. "Good." She tucked the note away, her pulse calm but unyielding. They should be. That evening, a charity event was held for survivors. Elegant music filled the ballroom, a replica of the Aurora's final night, down to the crystal lights in white uniforms. It was meant to honor her, but to Lyra it felt like a ghost repeating itself. As she stood by the balcony, Elias approached, wearing the same bracelet she once held after the wreck. "We could leave all this, disappear, start somewhere new." She turned to him, eyes shining with both love and ache. "And let them win?" He shook his head. "You've done enough." She smiled faintly. "Not yet." A hush fell as cameras turned toward her. The orchestra dimmed. Someone asked for a speech. Lyra stepped forward, her heart steady. "They called me the girl who saved a ship. But I didn't save it. I listened. The sea screamed that night and no one wanted to hear. So now, I'll speak for her." The crowd stood silent as she raised her head. "For every life beneath those waves, I will not be quiet."
The night of the explosion replayed in her dreams like a haunting rhythm. The creak of metal, the rush of black water, the faces swallowed by the dark. But this time, Lyra wasn't trapped beneath the sea. She was back on land, under glaring lights, sitting in a sealed interrogation room. Across from her sat a man she thought was dead. "Lorvik," she breathed. He smiled faintly, the scar on his cheek catching the light. "You shouldn't have come back to the wreck. You shouldn't have sunk it," she snapped. He leaned forward. "Do you really think it matters now? The evidence is gone. The governments are closing ranks. Your black box recording won't survive the week." Lyra's heart pounded, but she hid it behind a calm stare. "Then I guess you shouldn't have let me memorize it." His eyes flickered. "You didn't." She smiled slightly. "Every word." He stood, slamming his hand on the table.
You have no idea what you've unleashed, girl. You think the sea took everything from you? Wait till you see what the land does. Outside, Geneva's streets burned with protest chants and flashing lights. Elias watched the broadcast from a hotel rooftop, gripping the railing. Police had sealed off the tribunal center. Lyra hadn't come out in hours. He turned to the officer beside him, an ally from the investigation. She's still in there, Elias said. And Lorvik? Slipped through security, the officer replied grimly. But there's chatter. Something's happening inside. Elias's pulse surged. He raced down the stairwell, cutting through the crowd until he reached the barricade. She's in danger, he shouted. But the guards blocked him. Then boom! The building's upper floors shook, smoke curling from broken windows. People screamed. Elias's breath caught. Lyra! He leapt over the barrier before anyone could stop him, sprinting into the chaos as alarms wailed across the city. Inside, the tribunal hall was collapsing in smoke and confusion. Fire licked the walls. Papers fluttered like dying birds. Lyra stumbled through the haze, coughing, her ears ringing. The explosion had torn through the evidence room, but she still clutched a single drive, wrapped in foil and soaked with sweat. You can't run forever, Lordvik's voice echoed through the smoke. He stepped from the shadows, pistol in hand. They'll bury the story like they buried the dead. Maybe, but at least they'll have to dig deeper this time. He raised the gun. You think you're untouchable because the world's watching? She glanced at the shattered window overlooking the lake outside. No, she whispered. I think the world's about to see who you really are. And before he could react, she hurled the drive through the window, straight into the lake below. Lorvik's face twisted in rage as he fired. The bullet grazed her shoulder. Lyra fell back, gasping, the impact knocking her against the fallen beam. Elias burst through the door seconds later, covered in soot. Lyra! He rushed to her side, grabbing her hand. She looked up at him, tears mixing with ash. The drive, it's safe. It's encrypted. It'll float. He pulled her to her feet. We're getting out. But Lorvik wasn't done. He aimed again. You ruined me, he growled. Elias turned just as the shot rang out. The bullet hit him square in the chest. Time shattered. Lyra screamed, catching him as he fell. Elias, no, stay with me. His hand trembled as he touched her face. You finished what they started. Don't let it die with me. His eyes closed as the firelight flickered across his skin. Lyra's scream echoed through the burning hall, a sound like the sea breaking its own heart. Hours later, she stood on the lake's shore, blood drying on her arm, smoke curling into the dawn. Divers recovered the drive from the water, miraculously intact. Lorvik was gone, swallowed by the fire or by his own cowardice. Reporters crowded around her, shouting questions. Miss Halden, what happens now? She looked up, her face pale but resolute. Now, she said softly, the sea takes back what's hers. She turned away from the cameras, staring at the lake where Elias's reflection seemed to linger, just a shimmer of light beneath the ripples. You didn't die for nothing, she whispered. I'll make sure they remember. And for the first time since the storm, the water seemed calm, as if listening. Somewhere deep within, she swore she could hear a heartbeat echoing beneath the waves. The sea wasn't done yet. It was waiting, watching, remembering.
The sea was calm the morning the verdict was announced. For the first time in nearly a year, Lyra woke without nightmares. She stood before a massive crowd gathered on the shoreline of Lisbon, where the tribunal had chosen to deliver its final decision. News cameras hovered like curious birds, capturing the moment the world had waited for. The commissioner stepped forward, his voice echoing through the salty air. After a full international inquiry, The MSC Aurora disaster has been declared an act of deliberate negligence and concealment. Gasps rippled through the crowd. All responsible parties had been stripped of their immunity and placed under arrest. The crowd erupted in cheers and tears. Lyra closed her eyes as the wind brushed her face. Justice. Not perfect, not clean, but real. The kind that bleeds before it heals. She could almost hear Elias's voice in the wind. You did it. She whispered back, No, we did. That afternoon, she visited the memorial built overlooking the Atlantic, a vast wall of black stone curved toward the sea, engraved with 6,000 names. Tourists passed by in hushed awe. Lyra walked slowly along the line of names until she found his, Elias Martin, etched beside hers. Someone had left a seashell on his inscription, carved with a single word, hope. She smiled through tears. You always hated grand gestures, but this one's for you. She took off the bracelet he'd worn, the one that survived the fire, and placed it on the shell. The tide was rising, water creeping close to her feet. The horizon shimmered with light, as if the ocean itself bowed in quiet gratitude. For a moment, it felt like he was still beside her, hand brushing hers in the wind. I'll keep listening, I promise. Weeks later, Lyra moved to a small coastal village in Iceland, a place where the sky and sea seemed to blur into one thought. She refused every interview, every offer to turn her story into a movie. The world already saw enough, she told them. The sea doesn't need a script. Instead, she volunteered as a maritime safety researcher, helping design better evacuation systems for cruise liners. At night, she'd sit by the frozen shore, sketching ship designs in a worn leather notebook. Locals began calling her the girl who listens to the ocean. One evening, while tracing the outline of a new vessel, she noticed something strange in the surf, a small object washing ashore. She walked closer. It was a piece of metal, rusted but familiar. She picked it up. It was part of the Aurora's hull. She smiled softly, the weight of memory pressing against her heart. You found me again. The world moved on, but Lyra became something larger than a headline. Schools taught her name alongside maritime safety laws. Survivors she'd rescued sent letters from every corner of the world, some with photographs of children who wouldn't have been alive if she hadn't acted that night. She kept them all in a wooden box marked Waves. Yet she never stopped feeling that quiet pull toward the horizon. Some said she visited the ocean every dawn, whispering to it like an old friend. Others swore they'd seen her swimming miles from shore, alone, unafraid. She once told a local fisherman, "The sea and I made a promise to never forget each other." He laughed and said, "Then you belong to her now." She smiled. "Maybe I always did." Years later, a storm unlike any in history struck the North Atlantic. Cargo ships vanished. Radios went silent. But when the clouds broke, rescuers found something miraculous. A beacon floating above the waves, pulsing with Lyra's name encoded in its signal. She was gone, but the beacon led them to survivors, hundreds of them, adrift and alive. The world called it divine. Those who knew her called it proof. On the memorial wall, new words were added beneath her name. She heard what others ignored. And every night since, sailors say the sea sounds different, as if whispering a woman's voice through the tides. Not screaming, not mourning, just remembering. Lyra Halden didn't vanish that day. She became what she had always been, the girl who became the sea.